Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It is wonderful to have you here for another episode of the show. If you're new to our podcast, welcome. It's great to have you here. And if you've been here before, welcome back. It's great to have you here as well. But in any case, if you've not yet downloaded our free report, which is about how to build a high-performance dental practice, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and grab it. It's a totally free resource, and it's going to give you some keys and some ideas and some thoughts and some steps to help you take your practice to the next level. To get hold of it, all you need to do is go to savvydentist.com/high-performance-report. As I said, it's entirely free. Go ahead and grab it, and I hope you find that a really helpful resource for you. Now, my guest today is Michelle E. Dickinson, and we're talking about a topic that I think is really important. And it's a topic that I think as a community, as a society, we need to be paying more attention to, and that is maintaining good mental health in a post-pandemic world. And what's really interesting is some of the stats around mental health in the post-pandemic world are insane. I'm not sure if you know, but there's 69% of employees experiencing burnout, according to some stats. 1 in 3 Americans right now are dealing with either anxiety or depression. And that's up from 1 in 5 people who might have experienced that in their life. So as a community, as a society, and as employers in a business, i.e. dental practice, we need to be mindful of the impacts of mental well-being. We need to be mindful of how we create an environment that supports mental health. And of course, we want to be able to provide the level of care and support that is appropriate for the individuals on our team. So in this episode, we're having some really important conversations with Michelle. She's a massive advocate for taking care of mental health of team members. She's a massive advocate of helping employers support their team in that regard. And I think this is just a really useful conversation because this situation, this pandemic in itself is not going to sort itself out by itself. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I hope you find it thought-provoking. And more importantly, I hope you find it useful, practical, and actionable. Here's Michelle. Michelle Dickinson, thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us all the way from New Jersey. How are you this evening for you, this afternoon for me? How's things?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Oh, I'm really glad you're here as well. And we've got such an important topic to talk about today, and that is around mental health in the post-pandemic world. It's a bit of a challenge. I think we can all acknowledge that the last 2 or 3 years have been, years of upheaval to say the least, years of uncertainty, and that's had an impact on people's well-being. Michelle, I just wanted, before we get into your story, which is a really fascinating story, can we just talk a little bit about the scope, the breadth, the depth of this particular issue? You've got some interesting stats to share, and I was wondering, just for context, can we just talk about these stats so we can get an idea of the scale of this issue?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, before this pandemic, it was said that 1 in 5 would experience a mental health crisis in their lifetime. And now it says that 1 in 3 are either experiencing depression or anxiety.
As in right now?
As in right now, yeah.
So not even in their lifetime, it's as in right now?
Right now, yeah.
Wow. And what about the impact of that? Obviously, there's the personal cost for the individual. There's the personal cost for the people who care and support and love that individual.
Yeah.
What's the impact of them? But equally, what's the impact on the broader community, the health system, the productivity of the economy? Well, I mean, because this is a big number. 1 in 3 is huge.
I mean, if you think about it, you have, employers just trying to look after their people and employees who are going out on disability, employees who are leaving their jobs because of their own challenges. I mean, it's a huge impact. There's so many aspects to this where, not even to mention the times when employees are disguising that they're struggling with a mental health challenge and they're saying that it's a physical health challenge. I mean, it's huge. And then you talk about productivity and presenteeism. If somebody is dealing with a mental health crisis or they're caring for someone at home struggling, that's going to affect their ability to be present and to be engaged in their work. So you have that piece as well. And then you take into account working from home. We thought that was going to be a good thing. But the problem is we don't have bookends of the day that delineate when to start work and when to end work. So people are working around the clock and they're burning out. That's huge. And all of these things are impacting employers, employees, disability costs, benefits, everything. So we need to be talking about this. This is a very, very important topic.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I think it's critical we talk about this. And I was interested in the statistic where people working from home are experiencing burnout. As you said, the bookends, there's no bookends. Yeah. And I'm curious to understand whether the isolation is factoring into that as well, where perhaps because we're social animals, the whole idea of working from home sounds amazing. Get up in my pajamas, I've got the dog there. How good's that? Yeah. But it's not a holiday, is it? I mean, it's a different mindset. It's a different everything. Is that lack of social interaction part of the issue as well?
Well, it's the inability to connect the way we were used to connecting and the pressure to perform to make sure that people know that you're still doing a good job. And the expectation has shifted. We used to have commute time. So work days were starting at a certain time and ending, but expectation around work has increased. So people are working longer hours because they don't have the commute time. So they're actually putting in more hours of work. And all of that is contributing to employees just not stepping away from their work and not, the inability to travel, to go and get that respite, to go and get that vacation, to recharge themselves. It's not happening. People are just working around the clock. And then, like you said, we're creatures that are wired for connection. And the best that we have is this visual Zoom platform or Skype or something. But it's not the same. So I think pressure to perform, to prove that people are, adding value really has them engaged longer hours than they traditionally have.
And I guess the same is true for the employer as well. I mean, they're probably going through the same sort of thing themselves. They're probably, many employers would be going through their own mental health challenges or, again, dealing with someone else who is, but then they're coming back to try and support and encourage their team. And that's, again, a bit of a weight of responsibility. I wanted to touch on the word responsibility for a moment because I want to use this as a segue into your own life and how you came to this work. And I've read a bit about your story and about how you took on a lot of responsibility caring for someone at a very young age. And I wondered if you could start our conversation by just sharing a little bit about that experience, what was happening, what the impacts of that were, and again, just to set some context for our conversation today.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I never thought I would be talking about this. I thought I would be working in a corporate job doing something totally different, but that's not how things would unfold for me. So I grew up with a mother who had bipolar disorder. I cared for her for a large portion of my life until my adult years even. And she had traditional symptoms of bipolar disorder, rapid highs and very depressing lows. And it shaped me. I mean, it taught me compassion, but it also impacted me in a way that I was aware of what mental health was. I was aware of what severe depression looked like, probably more than the average person, let alone a child. And that shaped me. And I survived it. So I was actually quite proud because I said, in the face of all this, I was able to, get a good job, work really hard. And then, fast forward, and not something I spoke about. It was definitely not something I spoke about, having a mom who was sick. It was definitely something that we kept as a secret, never spoke about. And then fast forward, I was in my corporate job working, and a colleague of mine had found out that I had grown up with a mom with bipolar disorder and nominated me to give a TED Talk about it. So
wow.
Talk about not talking about it to oh, we're going to give a TED Talk about it.
One end of the spectrum to the other.
Totally. Right. So then I give the TED Talk about it, and that shifted everything for me because there is such power in going first and telling your story that opens up a door of relatedness to other people. And so people started to just sort of come out of nowhere and talk to me about their experience and that they love someone with a mental illness or that they struggled. And I said to myself, if I could do this in a 10-minute TED Talk, what could I do if I wrote my memoir? So that inspired me to go on and write my memoir, Breaking Into My Life, to really humanize mental health. I really wanted people to understand it's nothing to fear. We all need to have a little bit more compassion for people who are struggling. That's going to make the world a better place. So that's why I wrote the book, and ultimately why I left my corporate job and started my company.
Fantastic. Well, firstly, congratulations on taking the leap. That takes a big act of courage as well, to leave something comfortable and safe behind to step into new territories. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what sharing that story, obviously it meant a lot for other people. They could relate to that and all that. So what did it mean for you? What did it give you to be up on that stage and to be able to talk about something that had been hidden for so long?
Yeah, I spent a large portion of my young adult life being very angry at my mom, being very resentful, because I felt that her illness prevented me in having access to things or dreams that I had. So I was very angry with her. And then I went and I did a lot of self-discovery work, and I sort of tried to unpack the impact of her. And as I started to do this work, once I was able to sort of heal from this, I found the work that I was doing a way to celebrate her. Once I was able to separate her from her illness, because a lot of times we collapse people with their diagnosis, but I was able to see my mother was a beautiful human being and she had a mental illness, and they were not the same. When I would give these talks about her or my experience with her, it was sort of a way to keep her spirit alive.
Can you just talk about that separation from home? Because I think that's really important, because I suspect all of us have been guilty of collapsing the illness and the person into one being. And of course, it's not the same. So could you just elaborate on that for a bit?
Sure. I think when you love someone with a mental illness, there's a saying that says the hurt others. And my mother was someone who was hurting, and she had been she had undergone shock therapy. She had had cocktails of pharmaceuticals. She tried everything to try to deal with her depression, her bipolar disorder. And so it's very easy to get caught up in the impact that your loved one is having on you. You're really focused on you because you're mean to me. And so for a lot of the experience, I was very focused on how she treated me instead of the way she's treating me is because of her illness. So I had to learn that if I could step outside of the impact she was having on me, then I could separate her from her illness and love her for who she is when she's not experiencing extreme, symptoms.
I wanted to ask you, because you've been in that role of caring for someone with a mental illness, and how did you manage to take care of yourself while taking care of her? And how did you put boundaries in place? How did you practice self-care? Because there'll be a lot of people listening to this who may be caring for someone who is suffering a mental health issue or mental illness. And just for those people who might get drawn into the other person's illness, how did you keep yourself slightly apart from that?
And that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it because, looking back as a little girl, I didn't have a choice, right? I sort of showed up in this world and this was my role. But as I got older, I started to realize that I was getting lost in trying to do everything in my power to ease her pain at the expense of myself. So an example would be I would go and spend 3 days with her in her home and down in the New Jersey shore. Right. I'd spend 3 days with her and I would go to leave and she would be crying hysterical because it wasn't 5 days. And then what would happen? I would drive the whole 2 hours home to my place in northern New Jersey crying because I couldn't give her everything that she wanted, but I just gave her 3 days. It was starting to take away so much from me that I knew I needed therapy. So I got myself in therapy, and my therapist taught me, you have got to have boundaries. There is no amount of giving to your mother that is going to be enough. You are depleting yourself trying to do that. And so that's my message to caregivers. You have got to put the oxygen mask on yourself because no matter how much you deplete yourself, it's not going to be enough. You might think it might be, but it's not going to be enough. And you have to take care of yourself.
And that's a hard thing to do as well, because there's the intellectual part that says, yeah, I've got to put my own oxygen mask off before I put someone else's on, and I've got to look after me. But when you're faced in that situation, you're in the heat of the moment with a mother who's crying and wanting you to stay for 5 days. And of course, if you stayed for 5 days, potentially she'd want 7 days or 10 days or more days, right? So where does it end? But it's that dealing with it in the moment question I'd like to ask you is what do you do in that moment when your boundaries are being tested, your boundaries are being bumped up against? How do you maintain those boundaries in the heat of that moment?
And that's such a good question, because I had my own therapist tell me, you have to enact those boundaries. So like my mother would call me incessantly, like on the phone, at work, every day. And I'd be like, I cannot talk to her. And I knew it was going to be met with backlash. I knew I was in for it because I was choosing to like put that boundary in place, and it hurt and it sucked and she was mad and I had to deal with it. But it helped me be able to show up better for her in the long run. So I had to make those tough choices that I'm going to step away and she's going to be mad and it's all going to be okay. So as hard as it was, I did the very thing that most people can't even imagine to do. And I made sure that boundary was firm in place and dealt with the repercussions of it for my own health, my own wellness.
And then maintaining a relationship after the boundaries have been set and enforced. How did that pan out?
Eventually she came around and she realized it. She realized, I know what you're doing. I understand. And it worked itself out. We think of it as detrimental at the moment we're doing it. But I will tell you, she came around because you know what? She wanted what she could have of me when I could give it to her.
Great.
Versus everything,
I suspect, and again, I don't know, I'm just speaking hypothetically here, but I'm wondering whether for her, maybe that was a bit of an awakening for her as well to say, you know what, maybe I need to check my own behavior in this as well. Maybe because no parent's going to want to hurt their child, of course. No parent would ever want to do that. But I'm curious to understand, maybe she had some insight around her own contribution to that situation as well.
Yeah, I was technically her only daughter. So when she realized that I was stepping away, it probably really upset her. And she didn't want to lose that connection.
Yeah.
And then things shifted after that. I think for us, for our relationship, things shifted. In my situation, it actually served our relationship in the long term, as hard as it was for me to do, but it worked.
Well, I'm glad that had a happy ending. I wanted to just shift gear for a second because we've spoken about mental health from the perspective of caring for someone who's dealing with mental health. And if 1 in 3 people are experiencing mental health, then chances are 2 in 3 are supporting someone with mental health issues, right? So that probably means all of us in one form or another are either experiencing mental health or mental illness, and the remainder of us are perhaps supporting and coping and helping someone cope with that mental health illness. So we've spoken about the carer's perspective for a moment, but let's talk about the person who's actually experiencing mental illness. What sort of things would you say to someone who is experiencing either anxiety, depression in a post-pandemic world where, as you said, the prevalence is through the roof, higher than it was before the pandemic, possibly underreported even still?
Right.
How do we speak to that cohort?
First and foremost, I think a lot of us are diminishing how we're really doing because we're looking around us and saying, well, we're all in this pandemic. Who am I to complain? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So my first thing is to challenge people to not diminish if they feel a decrease in their level of joy. It's basic. Are you feeling a decrease in your level of joy? Are you losing interest in things that you love to do? And if the answer to that question is yes, then maybe you should just talk to someone about how you're feeling. And I'm not saying a therapist. I'm saying you have to have a trusted loved one, a trusted friend, your best friend, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister that you can confide in and just talk to. So my first recommendation is always for someone to just talk to someone that they trust.
Yeah.
And see how that feels. Because the problem is we ruminate in our minds and it makes it so much bigger than it really is. So when we actually verbalize how we're doing out to someone, it doesn't feel as scary. And then you trust someone to be able to share that with, and maybe you come up with, okay, so maybe I need to take a different action than I have. And maybe this isn't a normal way to be feeling right now.
I think lots and lots of wisdom in there. We're talking a little bit off air about in Australia, we have this Are You OK Day. And I think it's a really great day. It's incredibly well intentioned. But I also can't help but wonder whether when someone asks that question, are you okay, whether there's a tendency for someone who may not be okay to say, yeah, sure, I'm fine, no problems, no worries, because they don't either they don't feel that they want to share that with that particular individual,
right,
or they maybe don't want to burden that individual with what they're going through, as you said, who am I to complain or whatever else. What is it that stops people sharing or telling, or why do people not say, you know what, I'm not okay, I'm struggling, or I've got this issue going? What is it what are the boundaries that or barriers we need to overcome to be able to get that conversation going?
I think in general, our society, for example, if we were to talk about men's mental health, our society teaches men that they don't talk about it, right? So like you have pockets of demographics. Like women, we have no problem chatting with our friends. Like we'll chat about everything, right? Yeah. But men don't talk about it. Yeah. And society tells men that it's not okay to talk about your feelings. So you have that. Plus, older generations, we prayed about it or we just dealt with it. We toughed it out. I mean, I had a conversation with a gentleman last month who said, I don't have mental illness challenges. I'm tougher than most. And so he literally believes that it's all about mental toughness versus anything else. You still have these belief systems that exist that prevent people from feeling comfortable or safe talking about how they're doing, and that's the unfortunate part is if someone doesn't feel safe disclosing to someone. I mean, if you take, for example, the workplace, if there's not psychological safety and they don't have a trusting rapport with their leader or their boss, like they are not going to feel like it's appropriate to share what they're dealing with. And they'll just tough it out or find vices like I'm going to have a drink at the bar or I'm going to go have a cigarette or whatever to just numb the pain of what they're dealing with. And that's just so unfortunate.
And ultimately contributes to a downward spiral, because if you're not taking care of your physical health, perhaps the impact on your mental health as well is, another takes another blow. I wanted to talk a bit about the employer's perspective for a moment, because I think, most employers that I know, and my predominant business is to deal with employers in a dental practice environment. And so the people I talk to genuinely care for their people. They really do. They want the best for their people. But there's also a case of how much care is too much care. They don't quite know what's the appropriate level of engagement. They don't quite know what to put in place. They don't quite know how to provide that environment, because, really candidly, no one teaches us in dentistry how to run a practice, let alone, that's all the marketing, the finance, none of that's covered. And then we throw in this, and by the way, we now want you to be providing a psychologically safe workspace for your workforce. That's a big undertaking. So for employers who will be the primary listeners to this show, what does good look like from an employer's point of view? What's the appropriate level of support? When is too much support invasive? And when is not enough support neglectful?
I think that especially coming out of this pandemic, we all have a responsibility to normalize the narrative around brain health. And it's nothing that any individual industry has asked for. It is a result of societal norms. But when you look at the prevalence of the number of people impacted by a mental health imbalance because of this pandemic, I think we all need to step up a little bit more and start normalizing the conversation, because the reality is employers can provide benefits and resources all day long. But if your people don't have a healthy relationship to the brain and understand that it's not any different than getting support for an organ if they need it, like say they have heart disease, God forbid, or some other physical ailment, they're gonna easily reach out and leverage whatever benefits are available. We have to do a better job of getting people comfortable talking about brain health so that they access the care, so that it's proactive instead of, oh my goodness, so-and-so is in a crisis because they've been simmering for a long time and didn't utilize what's available to them to help them.
So the people listening to the podcast here are going to be saying, get it, want to be supportive, want to make sure that we're looking after our people. We're in healthcare, right? So emphasis on care. So we want to care for people. We want to care for our patients. We want to care for our team. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, they're pragmatic business people as well.
Yeah.
And I know that there's many dividends that come from, looking after your team. There's the personal relationship, there's the well-being of the individual. Like that's a given.
Right.
Can we just talk about the commercial outcomes for a second? I don't want to diminish the personal outcomes because I think that's the primary focus, but I don't want to not talk about the upside and the benefits for the business as well. There are benefits in this, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Presenteeism, employees engaged in their work. I mean, we can't expect employees to leave the personal challenges at home and come to work and not expect them to bring their full selves to work. I mean, that's ludicrous. Like people are bringing with them what they're dealing with. And if they're dealing with something, they're not going to be nearly as effective in what they do, right? Like presenteeism is a big deal. We all know the correlation between mental health and physical health. If you have mental health challenges, chances are there's going to be some correlation with some physical ailment that you then have. So it's to everyone's best interest to keep everybody healthy as possible, right? And engaged in what they're doing so that together you succeed. So that's why I go back to let's normalize the conversation.
Yeah.
And even working with the corporations I've worked with, which you can apply to, practices, is when a leader in a particular organization talks about their own stuff. Like, let me tell you about the time that I had crippling anxiety. And you know what? I got support. And you know what? I'm okay now. They represent hope, and then they're leaders within your realm. So you're going to look to them to say, oh my goodness, like if this person, at this level of performance was able to navigate this, then so can I.
It's really interesting. It's funny. I was watching a show on Australian TV the other day. It's a show called Q&A, Question and Answer. And there was a particular politician on there, and they were talking about this very thing. It was about anxiety in the post-pandemic world. And they had on the panel, they had a former tennis player, professional tennis player, Yolanda Dokic from Australia, who I think she was in the top 10 at the top of her game. They had a couple of politicians, a psychiatrist of all people, and all of them were sharing around some of the challenges they'd experienced. And interestingly, the politician, he represents the side of politics that I typically don't vote for. However, my hat tip to him was such that he came out and said, look, I didn't expect to share this on national television, but I've been dealing with this most of my adult life. And it was a really mature, grown-up conversation. And I think what really came out of that for me, and I've made some notes as you were sharing your story as well, is about how people dealing with all these things still remain high-functioning in their role.
Right.
Like he's a federal politician. He's a senior member of the opposition in government. He's obviously very articulate. He's very smart. He's very successful in his role. Mm-hmm. And so what was really interesting to me is I think a lot of leaders feel they don't want to be vulnerable because it might undermine their authority or their leadership, whereas in actual fact, what I'm hearing you say and what I noticed on television the other day is it actually enhances their leadership.
Totally. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Makes them relatable and gives their people permission to be human.
There's something in this post-pandemic world about humanity, connection, and understanding in there. And I think as business owners, that can only be a good thing. And I love that. Michelle, you've been really, really kind and generous with your time today. I know it's evening time for you. What I wanted to ask you is, what do you think business owners really need to know that we've not covered? If you could tap them on the shoulder or whisper a little secret in their ear, what would you want people to come away from this conversation knowing, understanding, or considering into the future?
So for me, I reflect on the fact that I was diagnosed with depression and working in a corporate environment. And when I disclosed that I was dealing with depression, I was not met with a level of compassion that I had hoped for. But what that taught me was that my leader was not self-aware and didn't have her own healthy relationship to her own brain health. So don't assume that your leaders are equipped to support their people. Mm-hmm. We lean into emotional intelligence and make the assumption that if your leaders are emotionally intelligent, they're going to be able to lead their people. I assure you that's not the only answer. Your leaders need to have a keen awareness of their own relationship to mental health. And once they know what their relationship is to mental health and how they take care of their own mental health hygiene, can they lead a team of people who are affected by this pandemic?
Could you just explain to me what relationship with one's mental health is? Because if I've understood you correctly, your boss was sounding like they were dealing with their own mental illness but hadn't come to terms with it. Is that what you're saying?
Or she just didn't have a relationship to mental health, right? It was absent, meaning she never had to deal with it, whether it was in her family or herself. So how could she extend compassion to me?
Meaning she had no experience of it.
Right. Of her own that she was willing to even acknowledge. So to your point, maybe she'd never acknowledged it. But this all comes back to the conversation of unconscious bias. What are our unconscious biases to mental health? Because if you believe that mental health is a school shooting, God forbid, or if you believe that mental health is someone locked up in an insane asylum, you don't have any other relationship to that, that's how you're going to lead. I have a very dear friend that I got into a debate about this work with. And, at the end of the day, I asked her enough questions that she answered me with, I don't know if mental health is a cop-out or real.
Wow.
And so we still have people out there leading people who might believe that mental illnesses are a cop-out.
Well, that's wow, that's a confronting thought. Okay. Well, I guess that's the reality, that there are people who have that perspective. And may I inquire how that conversation ended?
I think it ended with her realizing her own biases.
Yep.
And me realizing that anyone can have these biases.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So just as we wrap up the conversation, we've spoken about people needing to be aware that the people they're turning to for support or opening up to may or may not be equipped to have that conversation.
Right.
And we've said that some of the people in positions of leadership may or may not have an awareness or relationship with mental health that is going to be useful enough to support that person going through it. Now, here's my question for the leaders, on behalf of the leaders who perhaps don't have that relationship or haven't experienced mental health challenges or indeed haven't had to deal with anyone with mental health challenges, and this is a foreign thing.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, hey, I'm ill-equipped to deal with this. So for the leader who feels that they're ill-equipped to deal with this or to provide the adequate support, what advice do you have for that particular leader?
We overcomplicate it, right? Everyone wants to know, what's the formula? What do I look for, right?
Yeah,
we overcomplicate
100%.
it. And you know what I say? Come from your heart.
Yeah.
Come from compassion. So let's return to our humanness.
Yes.
Let's return to the human beings that we are and come from a space of compassion and listen, and just shut up and listen and connect them to the resources, because sometimes people just need to feel heard.
Oh, that's so funny. I'm laughing not because of anything you said. I'm laughing because today is Friday, and on Friday I record podcasts. And a moment ago I recorded a podcast with a gentleman in England. A really fascinating conversation. What we spoke about was trying to find, I guess, forgetting the humanity of what we do and trying to find the 7 instant steps to, how do I fix this in 3 simple steps and all the rest of them. And really, it's just about being human.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love that. Yeah. So I love that. That seems to be the theme for the day. Michelle, you've got a lot of resources on your website. You've got a lot of tools there. For people that want to check out your work, they can head across to michelleedickinson.com. You've got a couple of websites there, of course. You've got careforyourpeople.com. You've got your book, of course. What's the best way for people to get to know you, to experience your work? How would you like people to reach out to you? Because I can guarantee it, off the back of this podcast, there'll be people wanting to know more about how can I support myself? How can I support others? Or how can I support my team particularly? Where could people find out more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I live on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my second home. So
okay.
your best bet is to connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow me there. I'm always posting information about mental health and resources that are available. And I love to connect with new people. And if there's anything I can do to support, please absolutely reach out to me there.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And once again, thank you for joining us all the way from New Jersey at nearly 9 o'clock at night now, I guess, or something like that. So thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to talk to you. Very important topic. I think it's a topic that we're going to be talking more and more and more about because I don't think this issue is going to solve itself. And so we need to be proactive and get on board with it. So again, from all of us here at Savvy Dentist, thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.